Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Louie, welcome back. It's just great to have you, man. Good to hang out.
Carey, it's always great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you're the leader of a large church who now gets to put survive global pandemic on his resume, which is awesome, right? I know you were hoping for that one, along with everyone else. You have always excelled at in-person experiences. I mean, you think about the whole Passion movement, Passion Church, when you gather 40,000 college students, when you're gathering and there's thousands of people in a service. What have the last 18 months taught you as a leader?
Whew, wow, that's a whole podcast in one question. Mm-hmm. The thing, Carey, about the last year and a half that has been different is not that it was hard. It really wasn't the challenges that we faced. It was just that no one had done it before. Yeah. So we're about to announce a pretty big announcement in four or 5 days with Passion. It's a really big thing, but it's something that I've done before. I have experience, so I know how to go up this Everest. And most, people who go up Everest know how to go up Everest. But nobody knew how to go up what we just went up. It was starting on day one with, I don't know what this mountain is. I don't know how big it is. I was just reading a letter that I wrote to our church about this same week last year. And the tone of it felt totally like we made it halfway and we're almost coming out the back of this thing. And I was just like, we had no idea what we were doing. And no leader did. So every leader was leading in the moment, extemporaneously drawing on wisdom, experience, and the Spirit of God to guide in every step. And I think the thing I learned the most in this last season was that you have to have a flexible story and a flexible organization if you're going to survive the contemporary global landscape. And it may not be a pandemic next time, but there will be a next time. The world is too globally interconnected now that if somebody sneezes in Beirut, you say, God bless you in Costa Rica. And that's just a new world order. And we now know that. Something happens in Wuhan and all of a sudden the whole world shuts down. And so that's leadership now. You can't plan like a 20-year arc of phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I mean, you can, but you better have a lot of contingencies and you better have the kind of people around you that know how to flex and flow. And you better have a product that's durable because the landscape's going to be very unstable.
Those are really good insights. So, I mean, you lead a large organization, you lead a movement that convenes tens of thousands of people, a church that does a similar thing. What have you learned about staying nimble? Because I agree with you. I run a little company with 8 employees. It's not that hard to stay nimble, but you're leading this big thing. What did you learn about staying flexible?
Well, I learned that large organizations don't like flexibility. I've learned that recently. There are enough of us now in our organization that flexibility isn't as cool of an idea as it was maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. So stability and structure are important. I mean, I have a skeleton and you have a skeleton and the next person has a skeleton and they're relatively the same. And they serve the same kinds of functions. They give you stability for when you're sitting still, and they give you the right kind of tools you need for when you want to move forward. Every skeleton does that. So I've been thinking of the organization like that. What kind of bones do you need so that you can sit still and be stable, but you also can stand up pretty quickly and then move forward? And a team needs to know what the guidelines are, what the baselines are. And a lot of times we throw those out the window in the name of flexibility. And that's a bad recipe for any family or any organization. But if you make your baselines, if you make those your, center line, then all of a sudden any flex or flow is now a negative impulse. And I just think that it's the balance. And so I've been trying to really embrace the balance. I'm way more of a flexor, of a pivoting person, but at the same time, I realize I'm running an organization that impacts not only the people on my team, but their spouses and their children, and a lot of other ripples. And I have to be responsible for that as well. So it's trying to keep both ideas in an even keel. And what the pandemic taught us is that the flex is essential. And if you can't flex, you're out of business. I mean, you're out of business. And a lot of people are out of business because they couldn't flex. Well, we could flex, thank goodness. So we very much stayed in business. In fact, if our business is telling people about the good news of Jesus, our business exponentially went off the chart in the last 18 months in a way we would have never dreamed in our entire lifetime. And I think most people whose main goal in life is to tell people about Jesus would say the same. There's a lot of loss, a lot of hardship, a lot of dreams went up in smoke, and a lot of weighty pain, and a lot of death, and a lot of sorrow, balanced with, I have never seen more people have exposure to the gospel maybe in my lifetime than in the last 18 months. And so it's kind of that thing of the cross. Rome was running the world. They had a lockdown grip on planet Earth. Caesar was God. They had all the cards. Yet right in the pinnacle of their power, God did the most important thing that's ever happened on planet Earth. And so in the middle of all the crazy of the last 18 months, I just kept thinking, you always do amazing things in circumstances that look completely counter to your ability to do something amazing. And so I think in hindsight, we're going to have a lot of reckoning to do with the loss of the pandemic, which I know our nation hasn't even started thinking about mourning the loss of COVID yet. But at some point, once the mourning and the reckoning has kind of had its moment, there's going to be, I think, a startling awareness that maybe we just saw the gospel advance in a way that we haven't seen in our lifetime.
How did you see that happen? Because I think a lot of churches and it's interesting. I think churches saw an initial surge, and then many saw a drop, and businesses were the opposite. They saw a drop, and then they saw a surge, those who could pivot. I'm going to have a couple of local restaurant tours from my area north of Toronto on, and I mean, they launched 2 restaurants in a pandemic, and I was talking to them last week, they can't keep up. That is not the story of most church leaders right now, and you seem to have been hinting at the fact that this was a banner year for being able to share the gospel. Can you talk about where you saw that traction, how it happened, Louie?
I think we're talking about 2 different things. I mean, as far as the church gathered, this is unknown right now, but it's not a weird sample set. So when I talk to a pastor who says, man, we don't know who's coming back to our church right now, I'm like, well, nobody knows who's going anywhere right now. It's just a complete reshuffling of the deck. And Carey, we'll talk eventually about the book, but a few weeks back when the book released, I was personalizing books after some of the gatherings here for about 3 weeks. And I had probably 500 30-second conversations with people who were at our gathering. I'm going to assume most of them were not our normal brick and mortar, hey, we've been a part of this house for a long, long time. They don't typically go in a book signing line. But of the 500 people that I talked to for maybe a half a minute each, got a chance to meet them, I'm not kidding when I tell you every 5th person started the conversation by saying, I just moved here.
Wow.
I just moved here. A lot of people from New York just moved here. A lot of people interesting from South Florida just moved here. People from random places like Greensboro, North Carolina, and Charlotte, and Nevada. And then every person in between them was, this is my first time here. I've been a part of your church during pandemic, but I've never been to the building before. So it's nice to meet you. And then in between them was someone who was visiting from out of town, who we never had an online church before the pandemic. So we didn't have a global audience for church before pandemic. But now we do. And so there would be random people saying, we drove here on Memorial Day weekend from San Luis Obispo, California, in our RV to come to the church that saved our lives during the pandemic. And it just gave me a snapshot of what it looks like to take a deck of cards and just shuffle them 4 or 5 times into a completely new deck. So that's the gathered church right now. Nobody really knows what's in that deck. But I can tell you story after story for as long as you want to stay on this podcast today of real people who had no gospel on their horizon, who are now alive in Christ because they heard the gospel through some electronic social media connectivity. A sister came to our Easter gathering last year, not this most recent, but in the middle of pandemic, because she saw that Sadie Robertson Huff was going to be speaking at our church, and she loves Sadie. So she says, like, we live on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. There's no one inviting us to church in our town. There's no Christian club at our school. Sadie's going to be at some church on Easter. I think I'll go. She comes, and at the end of the gathering, she puts her faith in Jesus. She's so excited about what she's heard. She goes and tells her sister, you have to come to the next gathering. Her sister comes to the next gathering and puts her faith in Jesus. 2 weeks later, their brother comes to church with them, and he puts his faith in Jesus. And there's 2 sisters and a brother on a dairy farm in Wisconsin who are starting a little Christian Bible study at their school this year with 7 other people who had no gospel on their radar. I can tell you story after story after story after story as long as you want to go. And to me, those kids are not factoring into your question. How are we all coming back together, and where is the flow and the rhythm going? They're just 3 people who were spiritually lost and now they're spiritually found. And I don't even know if they have a church in their 50 miles from their dairy farm to go to. So that's what I've seen a lot of happen. Passion Conference, Mercedes-Benz was pretty great. We thought it was a pinnacle moment until New Year's Eve 2021, when 785,000 people were online at Passion 2021 in 173 nations around the world. So we've just seen the reach, and then we're just one little tiny church. And so if you take the exponential, factors and you put them together, I believe there's going to be a moment when things normalize. And I don't mean we're going back to normal, but when people can feel like they're getting a new, I think churches are going to be filled with lots of people who found Jesus. And I think they're going to be missing a few who thought they knew Jesus and really weren't as interested as maybe they thought they were.
What are your current thoughts on online church, the good, the bad, and the ugly? As you mentioned, your local church wasn't online. It was kind of an in-person experience. So, and I realize these views are fluid and we're learning and all that stuff, but what are your thoughts about church online now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, to be really candid, our team was, still in the process of trying to decide what were our thoughts. And our team wasn't convinced that that's what we wanted to do. We had the good fortune of being blessed by at least having the conversation brewing for a year before March 2020. So we had put a team in place. We'd gotten all the equipment we needed. And we'd actually, for 6 months, Carey, this is crazy, been broadcasting our gatherings to no one, with an online host, with all the mixing and every people in place, and we're just sending it to nowhere.
So you're doing a dry run really, every weekend.
For 6 months. And philosophically, we're over here asking all these questions, and the data is all over the map, but giving goes up when you're online. Volunteerism goes up when you're online. Attendance goes down when you're online. That's just a general, that's obviously a very broad stroke. And so people are like, well, I don't know if your giving goes up and people come and volunteer occasionally. What's wrong with that? Why do you care how many people are in the building if you've got enough money to do everything you want to do? to me, the Great Assembly is about the dynamic of weeping with those who weep and rejoicing with those who rejoice. And you just cannot hardly accomplish that if you don't feel the atmosphere of someone's joy or pain. And so if you ask me right now, I would have to honestly say it's a neck and neck tie for me right now. And it's going to be hard for us to go back and say to the tens of thousands of people or whatever the numbers are that would join us for a gathering. I'm sorry, but the pandemic's over. We're going offline. But if the trade-off is somebody's having to make a decision, I don't feel great today. I don't feel really bad, but I don't feel great. And I could just, watch church from home. I think that the scripture says we bring a sacrifice of praise. This be my answer. I don't know where I am on online church. We bring a sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. Meaning when I go to church, it's a sacrifice, not I'm going to get something, but I'm actually coming to bring something. And sure, I will be blessed, but that's not why I'm coming. I'm coming to bless God. It's like today. I woke up and God gave me a gift today called Today. I wonder if I took the next step and said, thank you for the gift that you gave me today. I would like to give you the gift of serving you today and being a part of what you want me to do today. So, Carey, I'm old school like that. And I believe that the church that will survive is the church that people come to because God is worthy and they want to come bring their offering collectively to God. And so that it's not compatible with what people are experiencing in their den. I only came to church online twice since March because I've been in the building every Sunday except 4 Sundays on our stage since March 15th. And the Sundays I wasn't there is because I chose to be somewhere else on a beach, not thinking about anything. And I might have been watching, or joining church on my phone for a little bit. But the times I was actually at someone's house 2 times with 4 or 5 other people in our church joining the online gathering, I know what that feels like. And it doesn't feel like we bring a sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord.
No, that's fair. I really appreciate you weighing in on that. There's an ongoing debate about college-age students, so you have basically 750,000 who join you for Passion, 6 months ago, which is amazing. They're the most tech-savvy generation in history. We all know that. And yet so many leaders argue they don't like tech and they want in person instead, and yet they're online endlessly. Any thoughts about technology and reaching the next generation, Louie?
I wouldn't have anything probably more insightful to say than anybody who's written a scientific analysis of what technology is doing to the human brain. There is not an article that I've seen anywhere by anybody that says that our current use of technology is actually strengthening our neurological capacities.
Correct.
Or strengthening our sociological fabric, or strengthening our self-worth. And so we've got to face it. And what I've learned is that I think we need to pray for a Gen Z leader with a very compelling voice who can call their generation as a shepherd to say, hey, we're going to have to put this down on some level. Because the outcomes are going to be counterproductive for us and our children and our children's children. Because I don't think anybody in my demographic, and honestly, probably anyone in your demographic is going to be able to speak to a generation that has been tethered to technology from the jump. And there's always going to be the caveat. It's easy for you to say you had a MySpace page. It's easy for you to say you have to put your font up to a 24-point font to read your text messages on your phone. It's easy for you. You didn't grow up like this. And I think that's fair. And I would say, okay, then I'm praying then for a Gen Z leader who has a very compelling voice, who can just point to your heart condition, which everyone knows their own personal story isn't great. with technology. So yay for technology. I mean, we're using it right now. So, technology is fantastic. But the way technology is using us is not great. And so you just have to keep asking that question. Am I using technology today to advance God's mission for my life? Or is technology using me today to advance the mission of XYZ organization? And I am the product. And if you feel like you're tipping too far to one side, I think you have to take a pretty radical stand. And we're coming to a reckoning somewhere pretty soon, I believe. And I hope that there's a young leader who's ready to seize that moment and say, it's time to make a change.
Well, a lot of young leaders listening right now, so maybe somebody heard that, and I think that's really wise counsel. It is a two-edged sword, Louie. It is, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's also potentially positive and deeply damaging, and it's all of those things in one. So it's complicated.
Let's talk. Carey, just to follow up on that 1 second, I think that the message that I'm carrying, and I believe the message that you're ultimately carrying, is about seeing ourselves through the lens of the Creator. And this is what we're trying for every day, is to help someone see themselves not through the lens of themselves, but through the lens of the Creator. And it's like a compass. As soon as you take the pen out and you put the pencil at the middle and you put the little pinpoint around the edge, you're just cutting a big hole in the paper. But if you put the pen in the middle, you actually can draw a circle that has some beauty and form. And I think that we've got to get the pen and the pencil, in the right space. And if we do that, then I see myself every day, not through the lens of myself, but I see myself through the lens of the Creator. And it's very hard to consistently live that out when you're looking at a mere reflection of everybody else's reality.
That's a good analogy. Let's talk about in-person. We're going to get to your book, but let's talk about in-person experiences moving forward. Do you think these last 18 months and even the advent of technology, I mean, it was there before, but it's kind of around now. The genie's out of the bottle, right? Like you're online, everyone's online, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think in-person experiences will change? What will remain the same? What might be different? Any thoughts as you even look 6 months or a year in advance?
Well, you're asking me you're asking me to get on my tiptoes on the top rung of the ladder and try to look over the top of the hill. And it's hard to do that. I think most leaders right now, if they've learned anything in the last 18 months, it's soften all of your hard edge knowledge and wisdom just a hair and maybe say, I don't know. Yeah. So for me, Carey, I think it's looking back. I grew up in a real time, and maybe some other people did too, but my first memories of church were live network television. I know, crazy. I'm talking 11 a.m., the red light comes on the camera, we're on TV in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was that way up until when Dr. Stanley became the pastor and our church split, went from 3,000 people to 300 people, and all of a sudden we weren't on TV at all. But then the church got this massive wave of momentum, and In Touch Ministry started, and then we were on TV all over the world. And so when I was 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and you went to church, you knew you were on TV everywhere. And had there been social media, cell phones, and that kind of technology, you'd have been getting texts blowing you up during the entire gathering if you sat in the right seat. You're on every shot. I just saw you again. I just saw you in the choir. I just saw you doing whatever. Fortunately, we didn't have any of that. So it was only word of mouth. Somewhere later, somebody said, hey, I saw you on TV at First Baptist Church Atlanta. But my point is, it changed what happened in the room because you knew you were on TV. So you might have, if it were current, you might have raised your hands a little higher, or you might have smiled a little bit more often, or you might have chosen where you sat in that particular gathering because you knew where all the shots in the room were. Or maybe you didn't care or even know any of that. But I think most people knew we're on TV right now. So this is a dynamic that went away for me. So I wasn't on TV at church forever since then. I haven't been on live TV at church since, until right now. And now people who've been sitting at home watching TV and watching other people who have come back to the gatherings ahead of them, now they're in the shot that they were watching at home. You can't tell me that doesn't somehow on a subliminal level affect someone's experience in the moment. And so I think this is something that we have to really make sure that doesn't drive any decision that we make, nor does programming drive any decision we make. And if we say, hey, we're going to have a ministry moment right now, and I know it's not going to translate to you people at home, we sacrificed some programming in the peak of pandemic because things wouldn't translate to someone's living room. Those days are over. And now there will be no sacrifices made on my part for the person at home, because a gathering is a gathering. It's not a TV show. And it's supposed to be led by the Spirit, not led by a programmed mentality for people that are watching sitting 900 miles away. So I just want to say to people, if you are joining online, and that's what we try to say, Carey, you're not watching church today, you're joining us from Nebraska. Hey, join in. But if we take a little extra time here, or have a prayer moment or a ministry moment or a response moment, and it's not very entertaining, I'm sorry, but that's the moment we're in right now. And hopefully you can lean into that moment from wherever you are. So I think staying true to the Spirit, leading the gathering, and not being dictated by the red light is going to be the key for the church to really be what it needs to be in this next season.
I think that if I can insert a comment here, I think that's probably one of the things, that attitude, that philosophy that is so appealing and to younger people, that they're just hungering for something like that, which I think is awesome, Louie. So you open up your new book, Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table, and you open it with a story of you texting a friend looking for support, looking for empathy. It's probably been done 1 million times in life and 100 million times in the last year, as we've all hit the wall at different times. And your friend gave you something back you were not expecting to hear. Do you want to tell us that story? What was going on in your life? What happened? It's a fascinating thing, because we've all done that, and I'm guilty, Louie. I'm guilty.
Yeah, I don't want to get into all the specifics of the backdrop, but we all go through times where, it's a disappointing season on a lot of fronts. And this was one of those for me. And, when I say disappointing, I mean disappointed in myself and in other people. It was just like, and most times in life, especially in the flow of the world I live in, defending isn't really a good option. So you kind of ride things out. And this is 6-7 years ago, stretch a few months go by, and you're just riding things out. And my thinking is always, if you ride things out, typically something will sort of emerge and float to the surface, and there'll be some moment of vindication or something. And that had happened. And I wanted to celebrate it, and I needed some commiseration and celebration. So I texted a friend who had really walked the whole way with me and said, "You are not going to believe what just happened today." And I really just wanted somebody to put their arm around me and say, "Hey, man, you did good. You're good. You're all right." And my friend, I texted a long text too. And my friend texted back this little blurb, and I was like, surely any second now the next text is going to say, "Sorry, I hit send too soon. Here's the rest of the message." But that was it. So finally, I just dialed into those words, 9 words. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to focus on this. This is what I'm getting. And the words read, "Don't give the enemy a seat at your table." And Carey, I cannot describe to you how those words just cut through so many layers of frustration, bitterness, control, the fog, the staring at the ceiling at night, trying to manage all the outcomes. There was just so many layers of that, but those words just cut like a knife through a birthday cake, just like bam, slice falls over. And I'm like, what am I doing? I am reaching out to a friend to commiserate with me over some little ticky-tacky thing that happened today. I'm acting like an orphan when I'm a son of a king. And the enemy, my adversary, the capital E enemy who wants to destroy me, is at my table. And not only at my table, he's eating my lunch. And I was standing at the top of my driveway at our old house. And I it was like a moment of defiance. And everything didn't like instantaneously change, but everything was set in motion. And I said to myself standing there, and then I walked in the house and told Shelly, I said, you're not going to believe this text I just got. And babe, we are taking our table back. We are taking back our table. We are taking back the conversation, and it changed everything. I'm not trying to hype this too much. I might not be sitting here talking to you as the head of our organization had it not been for that moment. That's how powerful God used those 9 words in my life. And this book isn't about a text that I got on my phone. Nobody needs a book about a text I got on my phone. This book is about a text that God breathed out called Scripture. But getting there started with a friend who loved me enough to tell me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear.
In what ways do you think, or did your friend see that you might be giving the enemy a seat at your table? Like, what was going on in your mind?
Yeah, I think he saw me being defensive. I think he probably felt me leaning on him a little too much. Like, hey, I appreciate that you know that I'm with you in this, but you're putting too much weight on me. And isn't that a great way to know? I think when you're in a codependent relationship through some kind of hardship in life, you kind of lose sense of how much weight you're putting on each other. Like literally, if you move, I will fall on the floor, or if you move, you will fall on the floor if I move. And I think he felt that, and he was like, "Hey, I'm with you, and I believe in you, and I know I know you, but you're leaning too much on me when you've got God at your table leading you, and you are being defensive when." Look at you. You don't have anything to be defensive about. You are making way too big a deal out of this thing as if this is going to define you, and this isn't going to define you. No one thinks this about you. And so I think he just saw me in the deep end, hanging onto the life preserver with one hand and reaching out for him with the other, and then looking at me going, what are you doing? You're like, one of my spiritual leaders in life. I need you to, get out of the water and start acting like who you are. And it was that little wake up moment. And I think that's what we all have the opportunity to do when we see other people in this zone. And if I think he was feeling strong in that moment of life. There've been some other seasons of life where I've had to be that for him. And I think that's what's made our relationship strong, because there have been other seasons where I've tried to help him see more that the enemy's at his table. And so he was in a season of strength, and he could help me in a season of being ridiculous. And I think that's really more defining the season I was in. It wasn't a season of weakness as much as it was just being ridiculous and losing touch with who I am and who God is and who I am in him. And so isn't that the beauty of it though? We have friendships with people that when we're weak, they're strong. When they're strong, we're weak. And if you have the right people at your table, that's a possibility.
They say golf is 10% physical and 90% mental. I don't know. I've never played at a level that would test that. I think I'm still at the physical thing. But leadership is very similar, Louie, where so much of it happens in your mind. And this is where you go in that book. What mind games, what mental space do you see the traps that leaders keep falling into that might give way to the enemy having a seat at our table? What are some of the common pitfalls you see in leaders, either in yourself or in leaders in general, because you work with a lot?
Well, a phrase we've heard a lot in the last year, it's been around forever, but we've heard more of it in the last 18 months, is that idea of fight or flight. And it's a decision that we all make at different points of a day. Sometimes it's a real decision if you're out on a hike and you run into a bear. It's a real thing. Am I going to outrun this bear? Am I going to have to fight this bear? How's this going to go down? But as a leader, every single day, I believe that there's a challenge to our identity and a challenge to our security. Like, how secure am I in God's calling on my life? And how secure am I in my ability to do what God has called me to do? And insecurity opens a 4-car garage to having the enemy at your table, because it puts you in a defensive mindset. So you walk into your organization thinking who's with me and who's not with me. And this is what, when I have conversations with other leaders, it's amazing to me how the elite leaders talk about things they're working on. And the next tiers down leaders talk about the people they're working with. And it's what separates it's the separator.
It's fascinating.
It's the separator. And it doesn't mean that the elite leaders don't have relational issues. They just somehow have elevated out of security, I believe. I know what God's called me to do, and I know what I'm able to do. They've elevated into, let me tell you what we're working on. And they're not clued out to the needs of their team. And I've seen some that are very clued in. But all the conversation is, let me tell you what I'm working on. You drop down to your next few tiers of leaders, and as you go lower and lower, the conversations are, oh man, I got to tell you about this guy I'm working with. This guy is a piece of work. I have to tell you about this girl, this lady that's on our board. I'm telling you, she is, if it weren't for her, if she weren't there, da-da-da-da. And so I think the difference between those two people is a sense of security. And secure leaders are able to walk into an organization and not take stock every day of like, who's with me and who's not with me. They just walk in the door and say, I feel called to be here. I feel that God's going to give me what I need to lead our organization. And now I'm going to lead our organization, and I'm not going to go home and take roll across the room and go, now, did everybody's expression look positive today when I was rolling out the new idea? Do people like me here? Are there people against me here? Are there people that don't want me here? And, all of that feeds into that cycle that spirals us all the way down to what I call being a closed-fisted leader. And you want to make sure you hit before you get hit. And a lot of organizations operate that way. Like, they're watching the competition. That's all they do, is just watch the competition. And they're like, oh, they're opening a thing over on this corner. We better open on that corner before they get open on that corner. That is such a poor leadership strategy for any organization. Wake up and do what God has called you to do and be secure in that. And that's called open-handed leadership, where you actually go, wow, I'm so glad y'all are opening on that corner because it's closer to my house. We're not going to open on that corner because we don't really feel like that's what we're called to do, but I am going to come by and I'm going to make sure I give you my business because I want you to succeed. And I'm going to actually email everybody in our little neighborhood homeowners association and let them know that you're opening up closer to our house. That's called open-handed leadership. And if you put it on spiritual terms, the closed fist God cannot fill. But the empty hand and the open hand, God can fill. And so the way to grow your business and your organization is to open your hands, not to close your hands. And I think that maybe is a long roundabout answer to your question.
Oh, it's a great answer. And I'm so glad you started there. I'm sure you've got a list, Louie, but if we can drill down on insecurity, has that been a journey for you? And if so, what are you learning about becoming a more secure leader, or what have you seen about dealing with insecurity? Because that's been part of my journey too, over the last 2 or 3 decades. It's like, yeah, I started out pretty insecure and I still have my moments, but you're right. It takes something in an elite leader to say, hey, here's what I'm working on. Here are some of the struggles I'm going through. Here's what I'm doing to address them. How can I serve you? That's a journey. Any reflection from your own life on what has helped with that?
Well, I've talked about openly before, and I've talked to you before just about, I think the two, when in 2008, I fell into a pretty deep hole, a pretty dark place for a while. And I've said that I don't really know if I could articulate how that happened, but I've said before that if there were two hands pushing me over the edge at the end of the day, it was an unhealthy need for the approval of other people and a desire for control. And so these are real things in my story. And I don't think anything magical happened in 2008 or 9 in that season of coming out of that hole to make control and a need for approval just, vaporize out of my story. So it's been a process of getting to know them. And I think this is how we overcome the obstacles and how we grow as people, is we actually have to get to know the person that we are. And that means facing up to stuff and verbalizing it, and me even saying it again today, as much as you kind of want to say, hey, I said that 8 years ago. Can we move on from that now? So every so often, meaning a few times a month, I have to take stock of what my motivators are, because I know the tendency could be to revert back to needing approval. And approval is a tricky thing because commendation is a very healthy thing. And to be commended, recognized, acknowledged, affirmed, these are all good things. I have a bunch of kind people who said something nice about my book in the front. I like to call them commendations more than endorsements. A lot of those people didn't read the book probably, but they believed enough in me and they know me well enough to know this guy, can say something that might be used by God to help you. And I realize that 99.999% of the people in the world have no clue who I am. So you have commendation, and it's a good thing. But if that becomes adulation, which is my value is rooted in the amount of commendation I get on a given day, or the amount of affirmation I get on a given day, and that now that's the grade of my value. Now I'm, a hamster on a wheel, and the wheel will break, or I'll break, or we'll both break at some point. And so I have to check in consistently with myself and ask myself, am I doing this because I was called to do it? Am I taking pleasure in it because God created me and uniquely gifted me to do it? Or am I performing so that I can get adulation, which makes me feel important? And the answer on a given day, to be really candid, could be all over the map. But asking the question is what gets you pointing back to the center and pointing back to the origin, back to that lens I talked about, seeing myself through the lens of the Creator, not through the lens of me or through the lens of you, but seeing myself through the lens of the Creator. And I don't know how other leaders do it, Carey, so I'm not a leadership expert, but I would guess every leader struggles with that on some level.
Oh, I do. I'm doing daily motive checks.
Every human struggles with that on some level. And so when you add to that the control factor, you've got a combination just in those two things for a lot of train wrecks on a given day, especially if you're in a growing organization or if you're in a role like I'm in where people see your face regularly. So staying close to Jesus sounds like a simple response, but it's not simple at all. It is not complicated, but it's not like some elementary idea. Staying close to Jesus is what allows us to relinquish control, or not that we have any control, to understand that we're not in control and come to terms with it, make peace with it. I'm not in charge of hardly anything. And it allows us to know that we matter, and that we matter before we did anything, and that we'll matter to Him no matter what we do. Even if we really blow everything up, we'll still matter to Him. And there may be a lot of, stuff that has to get fixed, but we'll still matter to Him. And it's being close to Him that's where the power is.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. That's worth playing back at 1x speed and listening to a few times. So thank you for that. Any other ways that you see leaders giving the enemy a seat at the table?
Well, I think the most damaging thing that can happen to a leader, and this is probably the leadership axiom that's in this book that's kind of hidden. I don't know that if it's even written in clear language, but leaders are made to create, and leaders do a lot of different things. I mean, I think leaders rise above, and leaders they point in the right direction, and they do a lot of things. But ultimately, leaders create, and that's what a gift to think that we can actually make something that honors God and reflects God and helps people. So I don't know what somebody's leading today, but that's what hopefully you're doing. You're creating something that's reflecting the beauty of the Creator, and it's helping people, it's serving people, it's making people's lives richer, more meaningful. And so that's how important gaining the ground of your mind is, because you only have so much real estate at your mental table. And if you're spending a lot of it worrying about the finances, or worrying about the factions in your organization, or worrying about surviving personally in the midst of whatever pressures there are, then all of that time spent is time that you're not creating. And as soon as you stop creating, your organization starts dying. And so, yes, you may end up managing everything and getting control, but guess what? You got nothing to be in control of anymore because your organization's already dead. And so I think this is the cost that leaders are paying when stress, worry, competition are dominating their thinking, because before it puts you in a closed fist position, which is a losing position, and it's robbing you of the oxygen that you need to create something. And so I think getting the enemy away from my table as a leader looks a lot like walking in the door and going, okay, I did a heart check before I got here, but now I want to really get focused on what are we doing today? And I want to get about doing that, and not sitting back and being too contemplative about why so-and-so didn't speak to me in the parking lot this morning, because that might rob me today. And here's the real world. So I come into work, not talking about today. Bob doesn't talk to me, or Bonnie doesn't talk to me in the parking lot. And what that dominoes into, Carey, is 6 water cooler conversations. This is back in the day when people used to go to offices and work. 6 conversations through the day. What's up with Bonnie? You notice Bob? Anybody heard anything from what's going on with Bob? Bob thinking about leaving? Well, I don't know if he's thinking about leaving or not, but I don't know. I heard his marriage isn't in good shape, so maybe he's just out of whack. What's wrong with his marriage? Well, his wife's crazy. Well, I didn't know that. What's crazy about her? And by the time you hit go home time, what has happened? And if you multiply that out by a factor of 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 through your organization on any given Thursday, all the productivity that gets sapped out of your organization, much less the heart and soul. I mean, that's number one, but the productivity that just got sapped out, because we were supposed to come to work to create something good today. That's really why we came here today, not to clock in and clock out and get a paycheck. We came here to do something good. So leaders have to continually fight for the brain space to say, my mission is to lead a team to make something that makes other people's lives more meaningful. Did we do that today? And I think the more we're focused on that, the less the enemy is at our table.
How do you win back your mind? How do you get out of those mind games, out of the insecurity, out of the paranoia, out of the desire to control? What are some strategies that have really helped you? Because you go there in the book. Yeah,
well, you have to have a baseline. If it's you and you, then, and I know our audience today is across the the faith
Yeah,
landscape.
sure. But from your perspective,
if it's kind of you and you figuring things out in life, I don't know how you do that. Because for me, the only
nor do I
know how to do it is to go to an indisputable norm. So I guess it would be like if someone was an architect at the end of the day, they're like, hey, no, we put the level up or we put the thing up and this is square and this is not square. And we're going to go with square. For me, it's putting God's truth into the equation and going, okay, this is square and this is not square. And fortunately, we have his truth. We have scripture in our hands, which is a miracle. And we have his spirit to help us understand it. And we're in a relationship with him. So it's not just information, it actually is transformation. So it's a pretty great resource. And what I've found, Carey, for myself is that you can't get the enemy away from your table by fighting the enemy out of your table. You get the enemy away from your table by inviting truth to your table, realizing that he's already sitting there, namely your good shepherd. But it's replacing lies with truth. You can't fight a lie. You can only replace a lie. And so, and the simplest way to do that for me is literally to write it down. And I've talked about this a lot, but pandemic is a perfect example. A lot of people didn't make it through pandemic. Some of my friends don't have this opportunity. They didn't make it. But we, by the grace of God, if you're listening to this right now, you made it. And so when the enemy comes to you next month, when you're going through whatever challenge you're facing, personal, financial, relational, whatever's happening in your business or your organization and going on in your own mind, and the enemy says, hey man, this is going to be the last lap for you. You're not going to make it through this. You need to write that down. This guy's trying to sit down. What does he tell me? You're not going to make it through this month. And then I go, well, let me go to my baseline, to my truth, which is scripture. And I go right into God's word and I find him telling me that he's actually going to lead me through. And I have actual evidence to back it up because, Carey, the only way the enemy can tell me that I'm not going to make it through this situation is that I've made it through every situation that he told me I wasn't going to make it through.
Yeah.
So every time he told me I wasn't going to make it, he was wrong because I'm here listening to him tell me again I'm not going to make it. So I write across the top, God has brought me through every situation I've ever been in. The death of both of my parents after they're suffering years-long debilitating diseases. He's bringing me through 7 years of my wife's father's cancer. He brought me through a hole of depression that I never thought I'd see the light of day again. And I can go on forever. And every time, miraculously, God brought me through. So I wrote that on the top. Bottom line, you're not going to make it through this month. Top line, God has brought me through every situation I've ever been in. So I look at that and I just took my pen and scratched out the bottom line. Because the top line's actually true. Not hype, it's true. I circled it and I said, that's my new narrative. How you doing? When I went to have coffee with a friend, I said, man, it is hard right now. But you know what? God has brought me through every situation I've ever been through, and I believe he's going to bring me through this one. That's a completely different narrative than the coffee I was going to have the day before when I was going to tell the enemy's story when he asked me and say, I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm going to make it through this or not. That did not come from the shepherd sitting at my table. That came from the enemy who's been telling me that my whole life. So I crossed out his lie. I wrote down the truth and I made that my new narrative, not with signs and banners and whistles and the little things that you blow out the party favors on New Year's. Hey, everybody, I'm great. God's going to bring me. No, it's hard. It's tough, but God's going to bring me through.
That's so solid. And you're a musician, you write songs, music has been such a huge part. But as you're describing that, isn't that really the Psalms? Isn't that basically like you get into all 150 of them? It doesn't take you more than 5 minutes until you bumped into, the enemy's bearing down on us. It looks like it's over. but hey, I know better. And I really appreciate what you said about you versus you. I've thought about that a lot, and as a person of faith myself, a Christian myself, Louie, it's like, I don't know where I'd be if I only had myself as a counselor or self-affirmations as a counselor. And so I love that idea of objective truth. Anything else you want to share with leaders who are feeling like, I've allowed the negative voices to gain a little bit too much ground? Any final word for them, Louie?
Well, you're the leader. You want to be the leader. Most leaders want to be the leader. And the definition of being a leader is that you have to be able to see what is and make decisions based on that. You got to make the call. You got to make the choice. You've got to set the priority. And I think that when leaders have a tendency to do that in the corporate landscape, but then because of pace, you and I both know about pace, or because of choice, they say, but when it comes to me in my corporation, the corporation of me, I'm going to get a pass today or this week or this month. And a pass this month turns in a pass for life. And, everybody I know that talks about leadership says the most important axiom of leadership is that you have to start by leading yourself. And so I would just gently say that to every leader today. You have the capacity to lead. You know that already. You have the gifts and even the desire to lead. So lead. Lead by making the confession today, I'm going to take back my table. I'm going to take back my table. I can, and I'm going to. And again, if you have the power, the help of God in your life, then this is a reality of something that you can do. Even if it's just you, and there is no spiritual value in the equation, you still can take back your table. You can Dale Carnegie. You can still choose a better thought. You can still upgrade your thinking process. You can still root out things that are not true or helpful or don't match reality. Even if you don't have a spiritual component, you can immediately upgrade your thinking by opening your hands and just going and serving somewhere in the community. Promise you, that's going to change your mindset. I mean, there's studies that say when we go and volunteer and help in our communities, that it improves actually the neuron pathways in our brains and releases in us a sense of joy and peace. So even if you don't have a spiritual equation, there are ways to improve your thinking. But if you have the aid of God, you are a believer in Christ, a follower of Christ, you do believe in resurrection reality, then you've just got to make the decision at some point, I need to lead me. And I'm going to make that the priority, because being a better you means being a better leader for your organization.
Oh, Louie, as always, it's so rich. Thank you. So you are online and people want to follow you, and we'll see where that goes long term. Where can people follow you online? And then the book is called Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table, available everywhere books are sold. But tell us a little bit about anything online if people want to track with you a bit more.
Well, there's a few different ways that our organization moves. And I think the best way for people will be just to come to louiegiglio.com. I'm not trying to sell anything on my website. So it's not like, hey, I need to get more people there. But church links into there. Ultimately, conference, which is the gathering we do for 18 to 25-year-olds called Passion, will link into there. Books and resources will link into there. Or you can find, there's not too many Louie Giglios floating around. So I'm probably the one you're going to find on social media somewhere.
Louie, thanks for being with us again today. Really, really cherish our time together.
Carey, it's always rich and always something I look forward to. So blessings to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in real life very soon.
It's going to happen, man. I'm getting on planes again. Thanks, Louie.
Thank you.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.